The second lesson for the morning comes from Luke's Gospel, and we're reading from the 13th chapter. Now, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and quite unable to stand upright. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. Glory be to God who gives us the word. May God write that word on our hearts, and may God and God alone receive glory, honor, and praise. Every now and then you get a little pop-up on your computer screen that tells you about some antiquated laws that are still on the books throughout the United States. Now, these provide important information if you are planning on traveling to any of these places. For instance, in North Carolina, a bingo game cannot go on for more than 5 hours. In Quitman, Georgia, chickens are not allowed to cross the road, which means that in Quitman, Georgia, first graders have no jokes to tell. In Utah, marriage between cousins is illegal unless they are over 65. In Alabama, bear wrestling matches, that's spelled B-E-A-R, bear wrestling matches are prohibited. In Waynesboro, Virginia, it is illegal for a woman to drive down the street unless her husband walks in front of the car waving a red flag. Now, one that I think is a good idea, in the state of Washington, you can be fined or imprisoned for harassing a Bigfoot. And in Indiana, right here, still on the books, it is illegal in the state of Indiana to use public transportation or attend a public event within 4 hours of eating garlic or onions. Makes you wonder what goes on in Indianapolis, doesn't it? Now, if you are of a particular age, you will remember when stores and shops and theaters and restaurants were closed on Sundays. Back then, there were laws prohibiting businesses from opening on Sundays. They were called blue laws. And in our country, they went all the way back to the days of the Puritans in the 17th century, who prohibited commerce, sport, and entertainments on the Sabbath day, that is, Sunday. And lest you think that was not enforced, in the Reverend Samuel Peters' 1781 book, The General History of Connecticut, he describes very onerous colonial laws in the following manner. Blue laws, i.e. bloody laws, for they were all sanctified with whipping, cutting off the ears, burning the tongue, and death. Ah, the good old days. Someone doesn't show up for church, and a committee shows up at the guilty party's house, and punishment is exacted. Grace and love abounds. Now, we still have discussions about laws and rules for Sundays. We get a little worked up when there are sports practices and games on Sunday mornings. We get a little aggravated when we can't buy certain things on Sundays, not that any Presbyterian would. So you can begin to understand why Jesus' healing of a woman who had been stooped over for 18 years on the Sabbath day raised a ruckus. Sabbath observances, which inspired the Sunday, Lord's Day observances of the past, were serious laws and were to be practiced and observed with absolute devotion. Sabbath keeping was serious business. In Jesus' day, there were actually two ways to observe the Sabbath. Now remember, the first story of creation, Genesis 1, where God creates everything over a 6-day span of time and then rests on the seventh day. That's the basis for the Sabbath observance. Now, the first tradition of Sabbath keeping is found in Exodus chapter 20. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slaves, I thought those were the same things, your livestock, or the alien residents in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Here is the beginning of the resting Sabbath, with which most of us are acquainted. A day of rest for humans and beasts. Over time, minor adjustments were made to allow certain mandatory activities. But the Sabbath was to be a day of rest. For if God needed to rest, so did the creation. Now, a second tradition of Sabbath keeping also existed. Its basis is found in Deuteronomy 5. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your town, so that your male and female slave may rest as well. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Observe the Sabbath and keep it holy carries a different tone in this commandment, for this commandment is directly tied to God's work of freeing the people of Israel from enslavement in Egypt. In this tradition, people may undertake holy work, and especially a holy work that reflects the work of God on behalf of God's people. Two traditions concerning a common custom. One tradition says that nothing can be done on a Sabbath. The other tradition says that holy work is appropriate for Sabbath observance. Now come back to the gospel story. Jesus is confronted by a woman who has been bound in the captivity of being bowed down for 18 years. He called the woman to him, laid his hands on her, and she stood up straight and began to praise God. As God freed the people of Israel from captivity to the Egyptians, Jesus freed this woman from the captivity of her condition. Jesus was doing holy work that day. The issue of healing was not the concern of the religious authorities. Their concern was on the day on which Jesus performed the healing. There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day. Essentially, they were saying, You've been bent over for 18 years. What's one more day? Jesus saw a spirit of bondage present in the woman that restricted her independence and kept her from living life to the fullest. The religious folk saw a calendar problem. Jesus saw someone who had suffered for 18 years. The religious folk saw Jesus breaking a law prohibiting work on the Sabbath. Jesus saw an opportunity to remind people of who God is and what God is all about. The religious folks saw a tradition that needed to be preserved no matter what. The question comes down through the ages to you and to me. Who are the bowed down today? And what are we doing about them? Jesus didn't turn a blind eye to the woman of his day. Who are the bowed down, the oppressed, the enslaved, those forced to live lives that are less than the life God created them to live? Who are they in our day and time? Their voices are all around us if we are willing to listen. Their cries for justice and hope and fairness and life are all around us if we can summon the courage to hear them. The victims of violence cry out. The homeless cry out. The sick in body, mind, and spirit cry out. The brokenhearted cry out. The battered and the bruised cry out. The children of war cry out. The rejected and the abandoned cry out. The imprisoned cry out. The refugees cry out. The voices of oppression and enslavement surround us. Can we hear them? Or do we have excuses for ignoring them? Are we reticent to reach out to them for fear that they will become dependent on us for more and more and more? Are we reserved in our response to those voices because it will require us to move beyond our traditional boundaries to touch those we have never touched before? Are we hesitant to answer those voices because it seems that there are surely others who know how to handle that in better ways than we ever could? At the heart of Jesus' response is the power of compassion and understanding. Jesus sees an opportunity to bring the compassion and love of God to those who need it right there and then, even if it means breaking the traditions of Sabbath keeping. Jesus sees a moment when God's love can be incarnate in action, and he refuses to let that moment pass. Is that our understanding of ministry and mission? Do we see the needs of the world as opportunities to make real the love and compassion of God? Do we see broken people of our world as people who need the touch of God's love to make them whole? Do we see ministry and mission at its heart as being about understanding, compassion, kindness, and hope? Or do we see it as programs and statistics and reports and balances? If Jesus is teaching us anything at all in this story, it may well be that he is teaching us that there are times when we must live beyond the rules. If the rules enable us to share the love and mercy of God and bring hope and wholeness to those in need, then we should follow those rules. But if the rules keep us or hinder us or prevent us from sharing the love and compassion of God, a love and compassion that we have known for ourselves, then we must move beyond the rules to share with others what we ourselves have received. I wonder if the woman had any idea of what that day would be like for her. She had lived looking down for 18 years. If she looked at people, she did it from the corner of her eye or like William by raising his eyes upward? Did she really think that she would ever stand up straight? Did she ever think that the pain would be gone? The embarrassment would be gone? That the stares and the finger pointing would be gone? Or had she simply accepted her lot as the way life was going to be? How many are like her, resigned to life as it is, life with no expectations, only hopelessness and despondency day after day? They are legion, and they are around us, beside us, and sometimes within us. The brokenness of life is overwhelming, and it seems that there is no change on the horizon. And then we hear someone say, "You are free." And we are. And life is new and different and filled with joy and love and hope. When we can listen for the voices crying out around us, and when we can free ourselves from tradition and custom and holy habit to answer them with words and actions that proclaim, "You are free," then we bring God's love and compassion to life in our world, and the chains of enslavement and imprisonment fall to the ground, and there is freedom and justice and peace for now and evermore. Amen.